Welcome to the Calling the Quarters podcast. This is Season 3, Episode 5. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Welcome to this podcast where we talk to pagans, witches, druids, animists, and shamans about their life and work. Today, I'm talking with Erin Murphy Hiscock, who is a dedicated pagan and witch, who calls Montreal, Canada home. With a passion for natural-based spirituality, she spent years exploring and sharing her knowledge through popular books like The Green Witch, The House Witch, and The Green Witch's Grimoire. Erin's work focuses on making pagan practices accessible and meaningful in everyday life. I will now take you to my conversation with author Erin Hiscock Murphy. Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones, and today I'm very honored to have on our podcast author Erin Murphy Hiscock. Erin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Dean. I'm really looking forward to our talk.
I don't really know where to begin with you. You're an author who's been writing for quite a while, and you have a really impressive list of books as well as a podcast you had done. I want to talk maybe about growing up. Let's go back to the beginning. As a lifelong resident of Montreal, Canada, could you please share a bit about your upbringing and any of the religious traditions you were raised in?
My family was Anglican, sort of like the default Anglophone religious path. My mother is Scottish. She immigrated when she was young. My dad's Canadian. And my mom was the one who sort of directed the religious practice in the house. And so, of course, we went to church every Sunday. And it was fine. I think what I found most interesting as a child were the aspects of ritual to it. The familiarity of liturgy and the more exciting times of year where we had celebrations like Thanksgiving, where my mother always baked the bread to bring in to church to have in communion rather than wafers. Christmas, of course, Christmas Eve service for the kids, doing pageants and things like that. But as I got older, we got to do the midnight service, which was even more magical, with candles and carols and just something so incredibly special. And I find it interesting that those are the things that resonated with me because those were sort of the touch points that I found extremely comforting when I eventually found paganism too. You know, the fact that we have these specific festivals through the year that we can do specific things for, and the idea of coming back to a familiar way of doing things over and over, whether it be for, Esbats or solstices, equinoxes, or, what have you. So I find that really interesting. I started becoming disillusioned with church in general as a mid to older teen because we were very active within the church community. We belonged to a lot of different committees, flower committee, altar guild, youth group, things like that. And as often happens, the people who were doing the work kept being asked to do more work.
Right.
More work and more work and more work. And it got to the point where both my mother and I were getting very frustrated because nobody else was stepping up and we were burning out. And I very firmly believe that a spiritual community should be supportive. It should be there to provide the stability and the support and nurturing you need to rest and renew and enrich your own life. And we were not getting that. We were just being sucked dry. So eventually we just stopped. And I guess it was about 6 years later in university when I started researching modern witchcraft for a creative project I was working on with some friends. And I walked into a metaphysical shop to pick up a couple of books to see, what this was all about. And it felt wonderful. The energy of the shop was great. There were cats. That's always a bonus in my book. And I went home with 3 books that day. And as I started reading them for research, I started recognizing a resonance that really sort of spoke to me. Like, hey, I like this. This is how a spiritual practice should feel. And at that point, I just started slipping in more and more. I kept reading more and reading more and reading more. And eventually I started trying things, and I just never stopped after that.
Can we ask some of who the authors were that influenced you during this time period?
Absolutely. I went home with 3 books that first day. One of them was Lid Off the Cauldron by Patricia Crowther.
Oh, wow.
So very traditional UK Brit trad stuff. Dorothy Morrison's Everyday Magic, and Silver Ravenwolf's To Ride a Silver Broomstick, which was brand new.
Yeah.
So those 3 very different books really sort of gave me a nice cross-section of what modern practice could be like. The very traditional UK Wicca-based practice. Dorothy Morrison was more spellcraft and working with energies and correspondences. And then Silver was a sort of a meeting place of the two, sort of exploring spirituality through the practice of magic. And that and looking back now, that really sort of set the pace for how I would continue on drawing from these 3 different things to create my own sense of this is what I do, this is what I feel, this is what I believe.
Can we talk about your practices as a witch and what inspires you now?
I'm pretty intuitive, which I realize comes from years of trying a bunch of different stuff in books and trying to sort of follow more tradition-based exploration paths. My magical day looks very normal. And that's something that I try to communicate in my books too, because I don't feel like I have to do anything extracurricular.
Right.
Because my very daily life is magical. And trying to find the spiritual within the everyday, I think is very rewarding. It certainly is for me. And a lot of that actually came about because when I had my kids, I had to radically rework my personal practice because I couldn't just go to my altar and do something complex. I couldn't plan something down to the minute according to moon signs or planet transits or, planetary hours. I had to fit what I wanted to do into nooks and crannies of the day. And that's when I started to get a lot more laid back and free flowing and going, okay, well, if I can't set aside specific times of my day for spiritual practice, how do I fit spiritual practice into my current days? And I think it was a really important realization for me. And I think it really, really sort of underscored how I started teaching and writing about how people can do this and improve their lives, not by adding something extra, but by uncovering what's already there in order to make it easier, make it run more smoothly, have them feel more balanced in where they already are. rather than trying to find a completely different place.
I'm going to touch on that a little more if it's okay, because I think this is something that we're missing a lot in the context of when we talk about paganism as a whole or witchcraft as a whole. And in the modern books, I think it often gets confused, because on this podcast, we've had different types of witches. There are witches that are non-spiritual, and there are, witches that are only spiritual. And there's a lot of different types of people on the podcast. But for a lot of us, I include myself in this, who want to have this be a daily spiritual podcast, I think, daily spiritual process, it often gets lost, I think, or it's hard to find something that specifically speaks to that. Was this hard for you personally to find, or was this something you already had ingrained from your previous religious training?
No, it was very definitely a challenge for me, because early religious training, being Anglican, meant going to church once a week.
Right.
And I remember having an argument with somebody, early university. They were saying, you can't be a good person if you don't belong to a religion that teaches you how to be a good person. And I that doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
Because that suggests that atheists, for example, can't be good people. And no, I'm sorry, that's not grounded in any kind of logic whatsoever. My early religious training did not teach me how to be a good person. My early religious training taught me that I do bad things, but the Christian God forgives me for them because he understands humans are weak. And that never quite, it still doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah.
I learned how to be a decent human being from my family, saying, these are the things we do to help other people. These are the things we do to make the world a better place. We don't do it for reward, or rather we have the benefit of our actions, because if the world is a better place, then of course we benefit from that as well. But it's not a quid pro quo thing. Right? It's not a trade of I do this, you do that. Being a decent human being is just it should be your bottom line. It should be your basic standard, right?
Yeah.
So trying to find how to find the spiritual in everyday life, it took a lot of reflection, and it took a few years of just kind of interacting with the energy around me, the energy of people I encountered, and a lot of meditation before I realized that finding the spiritual in everyday life, it's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like that once a week I've checked the box. It is something that you do have to work at too. It's something that, if you find yourself tense, okay, I'm just going to take 2 moments. I'm going to close my eyes, take a deep breath. I'm going to check my personal energy. I'm going to check the energy of the environment I'm in. I'm going to step back emotionally from what I may be overreacting to, or the person who is eliciting this response from me. And how can I rebalance? How can I be a better person in this moment? And it's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
It's a very hard thing to do because it requires a lot of self-awareness, and it requires a lot of willingness to self-examine and admit, hey, I'm not being a great person right now. And nobody really likes to realize that. But once you realize, hey, I could be a better person here, you have an opportunity to touch something bigger and better. And I think that's incredibly enriching and incredibly empowering, because it means you're not stuck. You're not locked into what you're feeling or that terrible situation. At some level, you can make it better than it was. And I'm not saying you can use magic to completely turn a terrible situation around. I'm not saying that you can, completely fix a terrible personal life situation. What I'm saying is you can take a moment and say, how can I make this moment better? How can I be a better person in this moment? And it's not a better person than someone else. It's, how can I be a better person than I was 2 moments ago?
I love that. I want to ask, if you, in your experience as a writer, do you think there are key differences between the paganism and the witchcraft communities that you see in the United States and Canada?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think I can make a sweeping answer to that.
Right.
Not because the two countries have such vivid differences or they're a lot alike, but more because I think on a regional level, like a smaller regional level, there are going to be differences anywhere. Like, for example, someone practicing in New Hampshire is going to have a different practice than someone who practices in California, simply because the geographic location they're in is different. The way they interact with seasons, seasonal energy is going to be different. The energy of the culture around them is going to be different. I think that has more impact on how a community presents itself, or the energy or identity of a community. It has more impact on that than on a federal sort of country basis.
Yeah.
I think, like, for example, here in Quebec, we have a much larger Francophone population than an Anglophone population. And so a lot of our metaphysical shops are French focused, and French publishing on witchcraft and paganism has a different vibe to it. Because a lot of the English ones come from the United States, and they have a different way of approaching magic and spiritual practice than French does. It's a cultural thing. So in that respect, sure, there is a difference, because the materials you draw on, your primary sources, are going to be written from a different cultural point of view. Stuff in translation, I think that's an opportunity to explore another sort of another cultural approach to what you may be doing. Like, for example, I know my stuff's been translated into French, and I also know that the stuff I write isn't very much like the original French stuff that's either written in Quebec or that comes from France. So I think that's a great way to further develop your awareness of how people practice in other areas, simply because their cultural background could be different. But I think in North America, we're a lot closer to one another than, between North America and European cultural sources, which are incredibly varied within that region as well.
I want to talk about some of your writing, but when I was looking up your writing, I found a book that I wasn't aware of that came out 19 years ago. It was Out of the Broom Closet, and it was an interview with different witches. And I really wanted to ask you about this book and how you came to write it, and what was the kind of how did you experience the feedback from it after it came out?
That was a really interesting project. It was not originally my project. The original editor had to step down for personal reasons. And so the publisher asked if I would take the project on. And as a result, some of the original contributors didn't want to work with someone different. So I got to pull in other people to fill in the open slots, which was great because it meant I could draw on Canadians.
Yeah.
So there's a little more than just United States practitioners in there. It was a fascinating project because what we basically did was we asked, I think it's 50, could have been 25. I don't remember. It was a while ago. We asked contributors to write in their own words a story about how their coming out experience, right, whether it be self-identification as pagan or how it impacted their relationship with their families or their loved ones or their workplaces. And seeing the variety of answers was very interesting. We had people who were drummed out of their jobs. There were people who were ejected from their families, but we also had people who were welcomed with open arms. People who found a sense of strength in this new identity, and as a result became leaders at work or changed their careers to draw on strengths that or skills they hadn't ever thought would be applicable to their career or their work life or what have you. There were people who rejoiced in finding new found family. There were, in almost all of them, there was a sense of having to release the old, whether it be an unwelcoming environment, relationships that became toxic or outright aggressive, and sometimes leaving a situation that was good, but you realize you no longer fit because of your new self-identity. And you grieve that as well because you were in a great situation, you had something wonderful, but you realize that it doesn't necessarily benefit you anymore. And that's a kind of grief that I think doesn't get talked about a lot, because saying goodbye to something that was familiar and comfortable and good, but doesn't necessarily fulfill you or work positively towards what you want to do next, making that decision is incredibly difficult. And when you go through those stories in Out of the Broom Closet, I think there's something to take away from every single one of them, in that you can recognize the kinds of struggles or the kinds of triumphs that people talk about. And you realize how important these kinds of decisions are. You realize that choosing to follow a spiritual path like this and be true to yourself is incredibly inspiring. And there's also the flip side of sometimes just admitting it to yourself is the challenge. Because coming out of the broom closet doesn't necessarily have to be a big public deal. Not everybody has the right to know about your religion or your spiritual path. They don't have the right to that knowledge. It is personal. If you choose to share it, that's great, but you don't have to. There is nothing wrong with keeping it as something personal and precious.
Yeah.
And so coming out to yourself, saying, yes, this is what I choose. This is the path I'm going to follow, but I'm going to make this choice about it. It doesn't impact anybody else's choices. It doesn't mean you are taking away from anybody else. It doesn't mean you are taking away from your own experience because you choose to keep it private and personal. It's between you and your spiritual path. If you work with deity concepts, it's between you and them. If you work with just the global concept of nature is the divine, it's between you and that. I think when you do find something rewarding and joyful, like a pagan path, there is a lot of people do have that desire to be public about it, to say, this is me now, and I'm happy about it. I am thrilled to say this is me. But it's not for everyone. A lot of people are quieter. A lot of people just want to keep it to themselves, and that's absolutely fine, especially if you live in an environment that could be unwelcoming. Everybody has a different choice for different reasons, and every single one of them is valid.
You yourself, at one point, kind of had to come out of the broom closet. How did that affect your life?
It was actually mostly pretty easy. I worked in a bookstore, a science fiction and fantasy bookstore, and the owner sold it to the person who owned the metaphysical store the next block over. So where I had been going anyway, yeah, to buy books and supplies and stuff. And when eventually the owner closed the science fiction fantasy bookstore because big box stores just put it out of business.
Oh, yeah.
They just couldn't compete anymore. At least the medical physical bookstore kept going for a while because they could offer things for sale that you couldn't find in big box stores.
Right.
So yeah, I just sort of transferred over to that, and it was very fluid, actually. It was very easy in that respect.
Can we talk about this a little bit?
Sure. My publisher is actually Ed.M Media, which is a Simon & Schuster imprint. The Greenwich series has just been phenomenal for me. I originally wrote Way of the Greenwich. I think it came out in 2006. And it was a very quiet release. But Simon & Schuster decided to re-release it in that hardcover format about 10 years afterwards, somewhere around 2016, 2017. And now with social media, with Book Talk and Bookstagram, because it was such a pretty book, this beautiful new hardcover with the leaves and the herbs scattered all over it, it just hit a new generation of readers that really, really were ready for it. And being able to write more about green witchcraft has been such a gift for me, because I get to talk about how to touch natural energy during your day, how to suggest techniques and practices and exercises for people to experiment with, and if it works for them, great, and if it doesn't, they can just say, okay, I'll try the next thing. And I think that's really important because green witchcraft is such a personal thing. It's very much it's self-formed. I mean, it's not going to look the same between two people, and it shouldn't, because it is very much about how you and your energy interact with the energy of nature, and vice versa. So that's going to look different for everyone. And being able to write about this, to come up with different ideas and throw out sort of little experiments and say, try this, write down your observations. And sometimes your observations are going to be, wow, that did nothing for me. And that's fine, right? I mean, not everything is going to work. And nowhere in my books do I tell people that this is the way you have to do it, because I think that's incredibly limiting. Everybody's going to have a different way that they want to approach things. Everybody has a different thought form of how they perceive something. And it's another reason why I encourage people to make their own references and notes and consult them frequently, because just looking at a correspondence in a book is not going to tell you anything about how that symbol or plant is actually going to interact with you and your energy and your mindset. So a lot of green witchcraft is honestly experimentation. How does this work for me? How do I get along with this thing? What works for me? What does not? And you would think that I would get tired of writing about that, but I don't. I love coming up with new ways to say, hey, try this. Maybe this will work for you. Here's some stuff you could do with that thing you worked on in another book. Let's see if you like doing this, if it works for you, if it fits into your day, into your personal practice. Most recently, last year, the Green Witch Oracle deck was released. And that was a project that was really, really close to my heart, because I actually don't get along with tarot very well. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that it's very prescriptive.
Right.
And I think we've established that I am not a very prescriptive person. I'm very intuitive. How am I reacting to this thing? I'm going to come up with my own correspondence and symbology for it and use for it. I have tarot decks, some beautiful, beautiful tarot decks, but I have them for the art more than anything else. And I'll use them as meditation tools or things like that. But when I want to actually do divination, I will use random objects or random images. And it got to the point where I was like, you know what? I should codify this. I should take a look at my green witch practice and the tools and the symbols and the creatures that I associate with certain things. And I'm going to pull together like a deck idea so that I can do this. And I guess one of the perks of being a published author is I can do this, and it was for me, but everybody else got to play with it too. Nice. And it's had such amazing reception. And I mean, that really touches me, because a lot of it was, I mean, in the booklet too, I mean, I underscore these meanings are starting points. They're suggestions. If what I note down has no resonance for you, then look at the card. What does it say to you? Because your association with it is always going to have more impact on a reading than what mine might be. I mean, maybe you had a tragic encounter with a watering can when you were a child, and so the watering can card is going to mean something totally different. It's not going to mean bringing water to and sharing and nurturing. It's going to mean something negative, something to be avoided, something to, oh, I should look out because something could be a problem, as opposed to what it might say in the book. And I think that's super, super important for anyone practicing any path, to realize that something that's codified isn't necessarily the be-all, end-all. And doing the deck was also challenging in another way, because a lot of my cards kind of overlapped in meaning, and I knew what the subtle differences were, but my editor said, look, other people reading them are going to be like, well, but this is too much like this other card. So there were times where I had to sit back and sort of dig deep and say, okay, how are these two cards different to me? And then focus on the differences rather than the similar vibe. I was incredibly blessed to be able to work with Sarah Richard for the illustrations. She first did some interior art for the Greenwich Garden. And her art style just really, really meshed amazingly well with the Greenwich series vibe. And I was absolutely thrilled that she agreed to do the entire Oracle deck. And she is the one who did all the illustration work for the Greenwich sticker book, which is coming out on the 17th of September, which is tomorrow as we are recording this. It might be already out by the time people listen. And it's so much fun. Like I love throwing stickers everywhere. I put them in my planners, in my notebooks, on water bottles, on binders. I will throw them everywhere. And Sarah's just done such a lovely job. She's got flowers, she's got plants, she's got little frogs and toadstools and stars and moons and bowls and beautiful goblets. And it's just, I love going through it. My copies arrived a couple of days ago, and I was flipping through it going, oh, it's so amazing. I love it. It's just so cute. And I hope that other people enjoy it too. I mean, it's a little way to look and touch magic at a little moment during your day. You know, you look over, you see the sticker that you've put on the front of a cookbook or on the notebook you've got lying on the kitchen table as you go by, and you're like, oh yeah. You know, sometimes just that visual cue is enough to remind you that, yes, this is who I am, this is what I love, and you reach out and you touch that spiritual magic just for a moment.
I love that. What are some of your future plans and aspirations with the realm of witchcraft and nature-based spirituality writing?
Well, I've got a couple of books that I've been meandering through over the past couple of years. One of them is a book for younger witches.
Oh, nice.
Which came about because my circle of friends, everybody's got teenagers. And, you know, some of them just turned 13. Some of them are at the other end, 19, or have hit 20. But a lot of them are like, well, what do you do? How can you explain it to me? Or, I started collecting rocks and I like the feel of this one. Can you tell me what it is? Or, I saw a chickadee out the window. What do you think that means? So I've slowly been pulling together shorter chapters and exercises aimed at that age level so that kids can explore it. And again, sort of harking back to what I said at the beginning, it sort of gives you a sense of agency and a little more sense of control over your own life if you can reach out and rebalance yourself within the context of, you know, the larger sphere of natural energy. And I think that's something that a lot of teenagers could use, you know, that sense of agency, that sense of, I do have control over something and I can release some of this tension and feel a little more cradled by what's around me rather than feeling like I'm constantly beating my head against it because I don't understand what's going on. So working on meditation, working on that self-awareness, working on being in the moment rather than sort of succumbing to the anxiety spiral that can hit. Having seen my oldest, who just turned 19, go through a lot of that in her teenage years, I think it's something that could be very valuable for teens of this kind of mindset, this sort of witchy bent. And I think I'd like to make it fun too. Like, explore the world around you. Like, go to your backyard, or if you don't have a backyard, go to your local park. Find 5 different plants, whether it be in the grass or in planters or flower beds. Find 5 different plants and then come home and look them up. Learning a little more about what's around them, I think also helps, once again, leads right back to the how to be a decent human being. The more aware you are of the world around you, the more you want to treat it better.
Yeah.
So there's that one, and there's a book on seasons. The past few years, I've really been working on the concept of seasonal change and how energy fluxes through it and how we can better work with it. Because we all seem to be taken by surprise every time the seasons change. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, well, first of all, with climate change, our seasonal markers are shifting.
Yes.
So we are not seeing the same kind of natural response to the change in weather at the times of year that we are used to seeing them. But also, we tend to be so involved in our day-to-day work and activity that, once again, we forget to reach out and touch the energies that may be changing, so as to be more in tune with them, rather than all of a sudden, well, why do I feel terrible? Why do I feel stressed? Why do I feel tense? Why am I not sleeping well? Oh, hey, it's that time of year. So I've really been working on how to help people attune to seasonal energy as it shifts, by doing a lot of observation of how does it feel in the middle of a season? How does it feel coming to the end of a season? How does it feel transiting into the beginning of the next season? And I know it's helped me a lot. So now I just have to write it down and turn all these notes and personal research into something that other people can access.
It sounds wonderful.
I'm glad. I'm looking forward to reading it someday.
Me too. Erin, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I've loved getting a chance to talk to you. I look forward to reading more by you in the future. I want to mention again to people that the sticker book's going to come out tomorrow, and we're going to have links to that in the bio, as well as other books by Erin. Erin, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Dean. This has been a wonderful hour.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us today for a fascinating conversation with Erin Murphy Hiscock, the renowned author and pagan practitioner. Be sure to check out her books, including The Green Witch, The House Witch, and The Green Witch's Grimoire. For more insights into nature-based spirituality, remember that Erin's blog and books are linked in the bio. Until next time, may your path be full of magic and wonder. Blessed be.